Well, good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome all those that are listening to the Owners Council webinar series. Today's topic is Lean, how to maximize your design build project. And we have a tremendous presenter and speaker, Dave Umstot, that I'll introduce here in just a minute. My name is Mike Meredith, and I am the Western Pacific Region's Design Build Institute of America's Owners Council Director, and I always invite those owners who have an interest in the board to be in contact with me, or at the very least, if you have any questions concerning design build from an owner's perspective, please let us know. We will be eligible for continuing education credits through DBIA. After this presentation. A copy of the presentation is going to be on our Western Pacific Region website, and there's a little owner's portal there. In fact, we have posted previous presentations as well for your reference. So here's the agenda, just a quick overview. It's pretty self-explanatory. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Kissauer, who's going to lead us through some important announcements and parameters of what we do. So Eric is a past DBIA Western Pacific Region president. He's retired now, has tremendous design build experience, and he's formed a new consulting company, the New Normal Leadership and Development, involved with leadership and coaching. So Eric, I'll let you take it.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. So here's our DBIA mission, to promote the value of design build project delivery, and also for teaching the integration and in turn and updating it even more is with our lean principles. Although that's not in the mission, that's all just part of the discussion. The vision: we are the industry's preeminent resource for leadership education. So we publish all his best practices relative to integrated project delivery of capital projects and the like. So some information and training. We have the manual of practice. Note, this is underlined here. It's free to DBIA members. This is a pretty comprehensive reference manual. The designated design build professional certification. So we have the largest number of DBIA certified professionals in the Western region, which includes Arizona, California, Hawaii, and Nevada. So we're encouraging all of our owners to, in your RFQ, perhaps it would be good to have a qualification for a DBIA designated professional as part of the team. We have online learning that you can see there and educational courses. And as a member, you get alerted to all of these different courses as they're coming up in the region. We're always looking for volunteers. We're a volunteer organization, and we have all of these different committees that you see here. Some are at the regional level, some are at the chapter level. And please, if you have time to volunteer, we could use your expertise and leadership. Some Owners Council information. We have training and scholarships available. There's the website. We have a hotline for local folks at the Western region, as well as for the national level. And as a bonus, you can also post your project announcements on that website as well. So a lot of information there, and please take advantage of the training and scholarships there. So a few things that we have coming up. We have the webinar series today for BIM and Lean in Design Build. We have, oh no, that's coming up in August, I'm sorry. And then we have another one that we've been looking to put on for the last couple of years, and this is in specialty and trade partner selection. So we expect to have some pretty good discussion around that, and we're working on a topic for October. Some other save the date information. We've got a lunch program coming up in the Bay Area on July 30th. There's a breakfast program in LA, Orange County, August 6th. There's our webinar again. There's BIM execution planning for design build that ACO is putting on for, it's a educational program. Certification workshop with Excel Construction up in Sacramento. Design Build Management Fundamentals, another course being offered, and this is being presented. The city of Anaheim is hosting this. For those of you with a lot of frequent flyer miles, we have a Hawaiian golf tournament, and then we have a Sacramento golf tournament coming up on September 9th. There's our board of directors. It's a very active board, and we're hoping to expand some opportunities for board members as some people are moving off the board in the near future. So there's our website. Please visit the website. You'll see a bunch of really good information. We have our calendar, we have all the educational opportunities, and naturally we have the Owners Council page there. And back to Mike. Mike, I think you're on mute.
Yes,
Mike,
I was. I was doing so well too. Design Build 101. So this is the year-long series of webinars, and it's designed to introduce the concepts of design build done right. And each year we like to tweak the major theme, and we're always welcome with ideas. So please send those in as you might have something really great for us to pursue. Next slide. So these were this year's topics, and we only have a couple more to go. October, we may or may not do that yet, but obviously you're on our mailing list, and you'll be notified if that's the case. Also, I'd like to, before I introduce Dave, kind of mentioned if you're a owner out there listening right now and you are in a room with potentially several other folks, we would love to have you send me an email so that we can kind of capture all that are in attendance. We know that that's common for people to kind of huddle and have lunch together and listen to the webinar, but for our records and future outreach, we'd really like to know who's listening in. So please do that. Send me some sort of a sign-in sheet as well, so that we can make sure that you are credited. Also wanted to identify that there's a new Owners Council, or I should say Owners Hub. It's on the national website, and that's geared at a national level for owners to share with other owners kind of latest trends, or it's been used a lot for recently is questions from owners doing some outreach. They're in a design build project, or they're developing design build. They have a question, they go to this hub, they inject their question into it and have access to all the other owners in the country who might have experienced that problem and had a great solution for it that they're willing to share with you. So we encourage you to take a look at that. Also, for those of you that are online, there is a drop-down tab here on the go-to menu. We'd love it if you were to type questions, send those. Eric will circle back and he'll facilitate those questions to David, and if I can inject anything, I'm happy to do that as well. All right, so now I want to introduce Dave Umstot. Dave is extremely well known in the industry. He's the co-founder and president of Umstot Project and Facility Solutions. He's also an author of Lean Project Delivery. You'll see a flyer for that here at the end of the presentation. It's a book I highly recommend. It's a great book to get oriented around this emerging and important, useful tool. Dave's credibility is also such that he's a former owner. And at this point, I'd really like to turn this over to Dave and let him walk through this presentation today on how to maximize your design build projects.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike, and welcome to everybody out there. I know we have people throughout the Western Pacific region and a couple actually joining from Europe today. So welcome. I hope you find this a valuable use of your time. So let's talk a little bit about Lean and how that's becoming more and more integrated into design build projects. We're going to talk through a number of examples. But before we get going, I want to dedicate this to my friend and our big-time design build advocate, Jacob Williams. He used to be the assistant director at the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works and really did a lot to advance design build in Southern California and California as a whole. So Jacob, this is for you, my friend. Okay, sink or swim together. Sure glad the hole isn't at our end. See so many projects when I was an owner where people just had myopic viewpoints and hey, we're all in this together. If the electrician has a problem on a project, everyone's got a problem on the project. So need to kind of readjust our perspective on that. So let's talk a little bit about owner value and satisfaction. And we have owners on the call here, but this comes from a McGraw-Hill Smart Market report back in 2014. But they went out to owners and to architects and contractors and asked some pretty basic questions. Number one, what's important to you as an owner? And the top three things in order were schedule, cost, and quality, followed by safety. So then they asked some more probing questions with respect to how often did your expectations get met for schedule, cost, and quality. And so let's walk through this slide, but on the right-hand side is schedule. And what they found is that 12% of owners, so the blue here in the pie is always meets expectations, and then everything else is frequently, sometimes, or never. But kind of bottom line is this: owners on the schedule expectations only have their requirements met or expectations 12% of the time. And architects and contractors say they always meet expectations 36% of the time. So that is a 3 times disconnect between what architects and contractors think they're doing and what owners are saying is happening from their perspective. So let's move over to cost in the center here. We have 11% of the owners saying you've met or exceeded my expectations, and the architects and contractors think we've done that 31% of the time. So a 3-time disconnect yet again. So let's move to the left on the quality. And now the architects and contractors say, hey, we always exceed the owner's expectations 49% of the time, and the owner says only 20. So kind of in summary, we end up with a 2.5 to 3 times disconnect between owner's expectations and what the design and build team is doing to satisfy those expectations. So the takeaway here is twofold. One, owners, there's a tremendous opportunity to more clearly define what it is that you want. Number two, for the architects and contractors, there's tremendous opportunity to ask probing questions to better understand what owners want. Without having that alignment, it's going to be difficult to have success. Okay, moving forward, another smart market report from McGraw-Hill, and this ties to knowledge about Lean. And what they found is they went out to 400 respondents. Some were members of the Lean Construction Institute, others were members of the Associated General Contractors. But they asked people, fundamental questions. Hey, have you implemented Lean practices? Are you familiar with Lean practices, or have you never heard of Lean? And what they found is this. For those that are implementing Lean, 62% say, wow, our industry is inefficient or highly inefficient, versus only 55% of those that never heard of Lean. So this also says that we have a tremendous opportunity for educating people, and that as people learn to see, there's greater opportunity to improve. So let's look at some metrics. So this comes from a McKinsey study, which was published back in the spring of 2017. We've got Japan and the United States highlighted here. And what this shows is the productivity differential between the construction market and the overall economy by country. So if we drop to the bottom here in the United States, with respect to the last 20 years, the construction marketplace is basically 2.5% below the overall productivity of the balance of our economy, which would be the service sector and manufacturing. And last 10 years, not much better. And this is consistent across the world, so it's not unique to North America. Also from the same study, he says that construction-related spending accounts for 13% of the world's gross domestic product. Okay, and coming back to that productivity graph we just saw, if we matched the productivity gains in the service and manufacturing sector, basically there's a $1.6 trillion annual value that could be generated as part of that. Using the same money that we currently have allocated for capital costs, but delivering more value for the available funding. It's a huge opportunity for us. So McKinsey went on to say, hey, what are the things that we could do to help boost our productivity? And they came up with 7 major things. Reshape regulation, so allowing things more like progressive design build type of approaches. Rewire contracts to align them with the desired outcomes. Rethinking our entire approach to design. Improving our procurement and supply chain management and integration. How do we get better with our on-site execution, including integrating prefabrication and modularity where it makes sense? How do we leverage technology and innovation like other market sectors have? And how do we reskill our workers so that we're not necessarily using the same tools and approaches that we were 50 or 100 or even 200 years ago? Barbara White Bryson is someone I really look up to, but this is a quote from her book called The Owner's Dilemma. But ours is the only $1 trillion industry in the history of the world in which the misguided owners demand processes that increase cost and reduce quality. So this is a pretty stunning statement if you think about it. So as owners, we do a lot of things for the wrong reasons in a lot of cases, and that builds a lot of waste and a lot of cost into the process. So how can we be smarter about that and getting to our desired outcomes? So here's kind of the bottom line. If you use lean on a project, we have found that, or studies have found that you're 3 times as likely to finish on or ahead of schedule, and you're 2 times as likely to finish on or below your original budget. So that's a pretty compelling reason to think, why wouldn't we think about doing lean? And if you're unfamiliar with lean, here's kind of the core principles. It's all found on the foundation is really respect for people, and people build projects, and how do we end up leveraging their expertise and knowledge and the collective potential of that team. And we try to optimize the entire project as opposed to the piece, and that's the biggest challenge in my mind on our industry. Is we're very good at what we do, but we don't do a very good job of optimizing the entire project. How do we get rid of waste? How do we focus on improving flow and our processes to improve flow on the projects? How do we create more value of what we have, and how do we get better every day? So if you're unfamiliar with lean, there are basically 8 types of waste. I'm going to give you some specific examples here from construction here in a minute, but this last one, underutilizing the creativity of project team members, is huge, and that we really have to do a better job as an industry of allowing our teams to really bring what they have to the table and help us get better. Rework. Lack of coordination between disciplines. This is getting better, but still we have lots of opportunity to improve. Inefficient workflows. Over-design of systems, either not counting for diversity or using factors of safety which are above and beyond what code requirements are. Poor design that generates waste during construction. Designing over the allowable budget, okay? Well, that creates rework and inefficient workflow and a bunch of the other things that we talked about up top. Request for information, okay? Actually, studies done that request for information up in the Bay Area, railroad contractors did a study on just the process time for those that touch an RFI. So electrical contractor has a question, it goes to the builder, it goes to the owner's representative, which goes to the architect and to the electrical engineer and back. Whether it's in electrons or whether it's in paper copy, the process time alone is $1,500. Okay, and if you have a project with 1,000 RFIs, we can do the math. That's $1.5 million. It's not creating value for the project. So let's move on to construction, flushing money down the toilet. Waiting on another trade. That's a huge, huge problem in our industry. Waiting on information, waiting on supplies, rework, request for information. We just talked about that. Change orders. And change orders aren't bad per se, but what they do is they interrupt the flow of work. And that creates a lot of chaos in the planning process. Inadequate resources, inefficient workflows, workarounds, multiple handling of material, excess material, safety losses, improper sequencing of work, and the list goes on. But this gives you some kind of a sense of, all of these occur on our projects and how can we end up reducing them to create more value. Okay, so let's talk about a Dodge Data and Analytics report, which was done back in 2016. But the objective was, hey, let's benchmark owner satisfaction and project performance. And this is the pie chart shows the owners that participated in the various sectors, and wanted to know what was the impact of lean on their project performance and outcomes. So there were 81 serial builder owners, meaning owners that have a pretty large portfolio of capital projects on a year-over-year basis, and 162 projects. And they asked the owners to do two things. One, tell us about the characteristics of the best project that you've ever had. And then tell us about the characteristics of your typical project. And from that, there's some pretty interesting information that was garnished. This particular graphic, if we look to the left, it ties the schedule to the right budget. But the bluer bars represent the best projects from the study, and the green bars, the typical project. But 24% of the best projects completed ahead of schedule, 21% behind. So that means most of the rest of them finished on time. In contrast, 61% of the typical projects finished behind schedule. And I can tell you from my experience from 10 years of being a public owner, I would have been happy with 61% because when we did our calculations, it was 90% completed behind schedule. And then on the budget side, if we go to the right-hand side of the graph, 46% of the best projects completed under budget, and budget defined here as the budget that was approved by the authority at the time the project was approved. So think about either your board of governing board in a public sector or some type of capital asset allocation board on a private sector. And then 49% typical projects completed over budget. So pretty compelling information to consider. How do we replicate what's happening on the best projects? So they looked at schedule performance as well. And in this case, the blue graph is for the best projects and the orange is for typical or the lower one. And what you see is that for the best, there's a peak right there with no variance. 56% of the projects finished basically when they planned to finish. And 23% finished early, and then there's kind of a tail on the behind schedule. In contrast, there's a lot more variability for the typical projects. So once again, coming back to these best projects, what were some of the common themes that reduced variability in the schedule performance? Okay, what happened with budget? Okay, well, we see similar types of thing. And this one, it's not probably quite as pronounced, but there's a much steeper tail, if you will, or a bigger tail to the left-hand side for projects under budget for best projects, and kind of similarly a spike on the other side for typical projects. Okay, this is an important takeaway, particularly for public owners. What they found is that for best projects, 76% of them engage their key trade contractors before schematic design. Okay, so during business case validation and during conceptual design. And that's huge because typically what has happened in the past is the trade contractors get brought on maybe at a 30% design level, and we have lost the opportunity to leverage their expertise into the decision making that has the most impact on the quality, the cost, and even potentially the schedule of the project. So key takeaway here, 76% are doing that. So if there's one thing that you take away from today, whatever you can do to get specialty trade contractors engaged earlier will help you. Okay, so same study. So what were some of the lean tools that really showed up more often in best versus typical projects? So co-location, using the big room concept. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. Target value design, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Prefabrication and modularization. Conceptual and continuous estimating, full team onboarding. How do you get everybody aligned so that everyone's got a common mission and understanding of what it is we're trying to do? BIM design authoring, A3 thinking, and use of the last planner system. Okay. So the big room, if you're unfamiliar with this concept, what is it? Well, it's a physical space, but what's really important is the mindset and the behaviors that go with that. And it's really intensely focused on advancing the work and getting the right people in the room at the right time and having those accidental or purposeful conversations that need to happen in order to advance the work. So how are you going to behave as a team? And kind of the bottom line is we're trying to establish a collaborative environment where the team can really focus on the best interest of the project and advancing the goals of the project, whatever they may be. So to be effective, there are a number of things that need to happen. We've been to some big rooms that are not big rooms. They're just a co-located space. And everyone is sitting in the same space, but they're not behaving in a manner which they need to in order to truly affect collaboration. Okay, get to be a high-performing team. If you get to be a high-performing team, there's significant upside on the value proposition for the project. And ultimately, it will drive down your overall project cost because you're eliminating a lot of waste in that process. A lot of times we see rapid advancement of the work because we have the right people to make the right decisions in the right place at the right time. And harnessing the collective potential of the brain power in the room. And in typical big rooms, we see literally hundreds of years of experience to draw upon. I think the biggest one we've seen was about 1,200 years worth of collective experience in the room. That's a lot of lessons learned to leverage onto a project. Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with target value design, this is really about an approach to what's a value to you as the owner and defining that, and then how do we deliver that or optimize that within the constraints that we have from funding, schedules, perhaps from a space or operational perspective. If you're working in an operational airport, there's certainly things that come to bear that are going to be constraints on how you move forward with that. So target value design on the left-hand side, here's some of the typical estimating things versus the traditional. And cost as an input to the design process is key to target value design as opposed to an output of the design process. Meaning, let's talk about what the cost implications are when we're designing as opposed to designing it, handing a set of drawings to the estimator and saying, well, where are we at with our budget? That is a recipe for failure. We see it time and time again. Share information early and often. Ask for what you need as opposed to wait till I'm finished. Okay. Rapid model-based estimating. I'm going to show you some examples of that here in a minute, as opposed to doing the typical quantity takeoff and unit pricing. Use multiple solutions, so what's called set-based design or concurrent engineering, as opposed to committing early to a design solution which may not be the right one, which creates rework. Okay. And then really using target value design with a graphical display, and I'm going to show you some examples of this as well, as opposed to some type of tabular uniformat or CSI format 30-page estimate that has more detail in it than you really need. So I like to use this slide. So would you buy a car this way? I mean, this is fundamentally how we have historically estimated our projects. You know, give me all of these widgets and my unit prices. And I'll guarantee you, if you bought each of these individually, it's going to be probably three times as much as it would be if you bought it integrated off of the assembly line. So we need to move away from that unit pricing piece of this and more towards a holistic viewpoint on that. So I'm going to share some of the things that are happening with big data and predictive analytics. So there's a company called Building Catalyst. They're headquartered in Michigan, and they have worked with all of these builders on the right-hand side. So you can see it's who's who of probably the ENR top 100. And this is the geographic distribution of the projects. But what they did is they looked at 100 different types of projects, predominantly in either healthcare, some data center work, some hospitality, and education, and looked hard at all this. But this is what came out of that. So what we have on this is, if you look on the left-hand side, this is our traditional approach to estimating using $1 per square foot basis. And you'll see that there are some vertical and horizontal lines here that are dashed. That's basically the 8% bound is what we're looking at. So plus or minus 8% of the gross building area, or the cost tied to that. And what we find is that if we choose a typical dollars per square foot, so say we have a hospital, hospitals and operating room is a very different cost per square foot than a patient room or ambulatory care. So it's a very significant issue in really trying to understand what the function is. But if we look at this, 86% of the estimates on $1 per square foot basis, just on the basic type, end up being outside of that plus or minus 8%. Now, using the power of big data, shifting to the right here. So what are some of the attributes of the project? What is it being used for? What are the specified levels of quality? Where is it regionally? And all of a sudden we go from 86% outside to 84% inside. And you can see all the building types of purpose on the right-hand side here. But now we're starting to harness the data that we have in a more thoughtful manner, which allows us to make better decisions. Okay. So what does that look like in kind of a regression analysis? And I won't get into the statistics of this, but if you look at the scatter diagrams here on the left-hand side, this is direct building cost per square foot, and you can see that it's pretty tightly aligned. And so by understanding what type of function is going to be in the space, you can have a much better conceptual estimate and output on your approach. On the right-hand side, this is actually talks rather than dollars per square foot, is looking at gross building area. That's what GBA stands for. And you can see as the buildings get larger, there's a little more scatter tied to that. But up to a certain threshold, it's pretty tight. So 150,000 square feet or less, you're can be pretty well dialed in. Then last planner, for those that may not be familiar with this, this is a great system developed by Glenn Ballard and Greg Howe, but it's got 5 levels. And you'll hear people use the term pull planning, but that's only one element of the last planner system. So it's got 5 elements, starting at milestone planning, which is kind of a 30,000 foot level, looking to specify handoffs in the next 3 or 4 months, planning in more detail as we get closer to the work, using a 6-week make work ready plan, weekly work planning, and then really measuring how we did relative to our plan so that we can see how reliable it is and continuously get better. Okay, and it's a kind of a do loop tied to that. So now let's jump into some, what are some public owners doing in various parts of the West Coast here. University of Washington is doing a population health project up in Seattle at their campus. And it's a $230 million project funded by the Gates Foundation. And they wanted to do this in a different manner. So they're using what they call an integrated design build, but it's a progressive design build approach, meaning that they have published their target cost and went out and selected a design build team to help us design a facility that's going to meet the needs of this project within the available budget and try and enhance the value proposition. And they start talking about lean principles. So these are actually physically called out in the contract, which is awesome. So we want open communication and clearly defining what that means, okay? We want collaboration and specifically calling out what that means. Reliable promising, meaning that if you make a commitment to somebody else in the organization, they can rely that you're actually going to do what you said you did, okay? Commitment-based pull scheduling, so going back to the last planner conversation that we just had. Eliminating waste, things that don't create value for the owner. Quality and reduction in rework, okay? How is the team going to basically do that and continuously improve? Best performer, work is performed by the organization or individual best capable of performing the work. What a novel concept. Value of ideas, not status of author. So how do you leverage the collective potential of the team? Some of the best ideas may come from the least likely sources, and you shouldn't stifle that. That's what they're trying to achieve here. And then optimizing the entire project, not just the discipline or particular system in the building, because it all interacts. And to have a collective whole, we need to look at it that way. So here's a set-based approach to the design. We talked a little bit about that earlier, but they were looking at mid-block entries because this particular building faces out to the adjacent commercial area in the university district, and they wanted it to be not walled off, but really welcoming to the balance of the community at hand. So they were exploring different types of concepts that might meet that need. So moving on, this is a project at LAX, so Los Angeles International Airport, and it's in support to it's what's called the terminal cores, but the automated people mover, which is going to be coming to LAX in the near future. And this is getting the terminals prepared so that when the people mover does get into operation, that the terminals are ready to receive it. But this is what was called out in their RFP, request for proposal, lean construction. And specifically, hey, what are we looking for here? Okay, reliable promises, last planner system, value stream and process mapping, standard work. And furthermore, we want somebody on the team that's got the expertise to basically facilitate this and be a neutral third party. Pretty awesome, okay? Target value design plan, so same project. So how are we going to collaboratively design something with the available funding that meets the needs of the project and all the other constraints, including the operational and schedule requirements? So another set-based approach to design. So this was looking at the Tom Bradley International Terminal on the new facade. What might that look like? So it's giving you an example. So let's look through, this is actually kind of a timeline over the course of the last 16 months or so on the project. But on the front end, having a partnering session where everybody comes into an alignment on what is it that we want to achieve with this project? How are we going to behave as a team? What would success look like? And how will we measure that as we go and when we get to the end? Okay. And what came out of that was a charter. Okay. And so what they did is they developed, here are the things that we value as a team. Okay. Working safely, producing quality, having fun. Imagine that on a project. Okay. Making a fair and reasonable profit. Well, and how are they going to do that? Well, we will do the following: foster an environment of trust for one another, establish and maintain a culture of collaboration, communicate transparently and fairly, and so on and so forth. And they actually physically signed this. So everybody that was there that developed this in the room committed to it on the spot. Okay, so moving forward, well, data gap analysis. What do we, what don't we know that we need to know in order to have informed design? Where are the gaps? Okay. Then they've established a big room. Okay. Gold standard airports delivered. So they're very clear on what their goal is there. Furthermore, this is at the front end of the big room. You come in and here's this wall which talks about their process, the principles, the passion, what the performance metrics are or want to be. Here's the actual big room space. It's now occupied, and you have the Terminal 5 and 6 team, and it's called 5.5 down on the left-hand side, and on the upper right is the Tom Bradley International Terminal team, basically all co-located, working together. They are using both a combination of Last Planner and Scrum for managing their design process. So they're doing a pull plan right here. Their design manager is doing a forward pass, and this was to their 30% design submittal. And so they did a pull plan, and then they actually use Scrum for their actual production planning. And if you're unfamiliar with Scrum, this comes out of the software development industry, but the idea is you basically develop a backlog for a sprint, which is typically the 2 to no more than 4 week duration. And what are all of the tasks that need to happen in order to achieve that milestone? And then there's a Scrum board with a backlog, a doing, and a done category, and you track your metrics tied to that. And I got to get into too much detail, but this is kind of a closer look when they are first putting it up. They actually have a daily stand-up where they talk through, well, what did we get done today? Was there anything that was a roadblock? And then cluster group formation. So for target value design, they actually establish cluster groups for various design disciplines. So we look on the far left here, they have foundation, structure, geotech, facade, and enclosure. So all of that got incorporated in there. Other clusters were mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection. Another one for interiors. There were quite a few different cluster groups that were established to work on different issues. Then they actually tracked their cost as they went and posted this basically on the wall. But how are we trending on our costs for different clusters and overall for elements of the project? And so there were multiple pieces to that. Moving a little further south. So this is at University of California, San Diego. And they have a lot of work going on right now. It's a multi-billion-dollar capital program. And this was a future college that they just made a selection on. But the white buildings that you see kind of in the center of the image on the left is going to be the new future college. And it faces out into a very high visibility area in La Jolla. And so here were some organizing ideas that they ended up sharing with the progressive design build respondents. And we wanted a gateway experience. They wanted a vibrant mixed-use community feel. They wanted an active campus connection to the balance of the campus and to the public transportation elements coming to the campus. And here are some of the things that they specifically called out in their RFP. Working together, promoting integration, collaborative working environment. Okay, so they're actually making their selection based on people's proposed or teams' proposed approaches to integration and collaborative working environment. Okay, how are you going to deliver design excellence? And design excellence here, understanding, kind of coming back to the original pie charts in the front end of this presentation on schedule and quality and the cost, and that how do we bridge the gap between what owners' expectations are and the design and build communities' perspectives on how they're doing. Estimating and cost monitoring. They wanted a target value design process, okay, to allow to more informed, timely decisions that didn't have to be backtracked because the cost was not integrated into the decision-making process. And they also want high-performing teams. And so what does it take to have a high performing team? Well, there are really kind of three key elements to having a high performing team. You know, it's all found a foundation of trust. If people don't trust one another, you're kind of dead in the water. Secondly, everyone has to be aligned. What's our common mission and goal and vision? And then thirdly, once they have the alignment, giving them the autonomy to do their work in support or in context or framed and referenced by the alignment and the vision and goals. Huge, huge thing. So this is the leadership of a project team. And I think this is about a $300 million project, really talking through and learning through this game simulation on, you know, how do you end up engaging your team members and getting them to perform at a very high level. They're using Last Planner in design. So in this case, they're actually planning their design submittal. What are all the things that need to happen at a milestone level? That's why they're all diamonds. So this is the design team and the pre-construction team from the design builder. And moving on to what some others are doing. So the California State University system made a decision about 2 years ago that they were going to establish an alternative scheduling specification to replace their traditional CPM, FragNet, defend for a claim to a more collaborative construction planning process based around the Last Planner. So this is a 10-page specification that is now an option for work on any of the 23 California State University system campuses as an alternative to the traditional CPM approach. And they've been rolling out training throughout the system to really help people understand what is Last Planner, how do you use it, and what the expectations are if they use this new specification. So here is the Department of General Services. This is I guess it's actually technically an active solicitation, but they're really looking around to select a criteria architect engineering team for a project in Sacramento. But you can see here, selection criteria number 15, demonstrated abilities of the latest industry techniques, such as operating in a big room environment, progressive design build, lean principles, Last Planner, target value design, choosing by advantages, which is another lean concept. So you can see that there are more owners throughout, particularly California and Washington, that are integrating lean into their approach. So if you haven't seen it yet, you're going to see it soon. And if you're an owner and you want to know more about what others are doing, certainly feel free to reach out. I'd be glad to connect you with the owners of any of these sample projects we've talked through. So there are a few other resources that are available. There is a very nice cross-mapping between design build done right and lean practices that's posted on the Lean Construction Institute website. And so that'll be a hyperlink on the presentation that can take you there if you're interested in learning more. There are 30 some odd communities of practices throughout the United States, and quite a few of them here in the Western Pacific region, including Arizona, including Las Vegas, including multiple communities of practice here in California. And I don't think we have one in Hawaii, but I would encourage you to get engaged if you want to know more about how people are using lean. And then the Lean Construction Institute has a number of publications which may be beneficial if you want to do a little deeper dive. And then down here at the bottom, this is available on demand in either print or Kindle formats through Amazon. This was the book that Mike had referenced earlier. But it is intended to be bite-sized. There are 15 chapters, so you can pick and choose kind of how you want to read them. But what they do is they very clearly explain how you use some of these lean principles in design and construction, so that how do we make it meaningful as opposed to how does it apply to manufacturing or service industry? We're different. Well, this is the book that helps clarify that. So I think that takes us to questions. I thank you for your time and your interest today, and hopefully this was giving you some food for thought. And I hope that you start to explore and don't feel that you have to drink the entire thing at once. I mean, start with baby steps and just continue to build on that if you're interested in doing more with lean. So with that, I guess I don't know if we're going back to you, Mike, or to Eric for questions, but if we have any questions, let's hear them.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Dave. This is pretty comprehensive, and I think it helps people who are just getting started, as well as even some people that have had their toe in the water for a while. I have a couple of questions here. Of the lean tenants, do you have a recommendation or knowledge of what specifics lean principles get the biggest bang for the buck?
I think you have to kind of look at it as a holistic system. There will be those that will argue that lean should really be a system and kind of a culture. I will share that where we find most people in the construction industry start is with the use of the last planner system. If you were in the service or manufacturing industry, you would probably start with 5S, which is basically a concept that's, basically there are 5 S's tied to sort, set the order, standardize, sustain, and I'm missing one in the middle, but the bottom line is that the 5 of those are really about getting yourself organized. And if you're disorganized, you're never going to be able to see what you need to see through the chaos, if you will. So think about that at your house. If you're organized and you know where everything is, then that's fantastic. But a lot of us don't have the best housekeeping practices, and it becomes a much more difficult thing to define. So most people start with last planner, but I would say probably the biggest thing from our perspective is people build our projects, whether you're in the design side of the house, building side of the house, specialty trades. And to the extent we can establish a collaborative environment to get better communication, that is where I would start. Regardless of anything else, you can do that contractually, you can do that with a big room environment, you can do that through the last planner. There are a lot of different approaches, but that's probably the key. And as you see here, building championship project teams, I mean, collaboration is the only way that happens. And that's true in sports metaphors, and that's true in project teams.
Okay. Using the UW example, how did the owner implement what they, quote, specified as specific lean requirements? In other words, did they hire a consultant to implement, and did they train their own staff to lead this? How did they mandate the DBA, the design build entity, have that experience?
Okay, so that's a good question, and there are multiple elements that are approaches they took. So first off, when they had the shortlisted teams for the design build, the selection committee actually went out to each of the shortlisted teams and watched them actually interact with one another. So coming back to that whole collaborative environment question, and it really assessed well, and what's the chemistry of this team? Do they look like they work well together? Do they look collaborative, or do they look like it's a a bad marriage? And so that was kind of step number one, was selecting the team that they thought was the most collaborative and tied to that. Secondly, they did bring on a lean coach onto the project on the front end to try and provide coaching input as necessary. But in parallel to that, they were building their own capacity. And basically, the lean coach got less and less involved as the capacity of the team got greater. And then kind of to how do you end up sustaining that? Well, they actually had incentives in the contract, which I didn't talk about here, tied to actually achieving some of these collaborative and lean behaviors. And so the incentives were financial. You can have a big discussion about, does that actually motivate the right behavior? But that's an entirely different discussion. But that was one of the things that they were trying to do to actually measure it, and by measuring it, try and reinforce those behaviors.
Okay. During your presentation, you made a comment about how one of the things within the last planner system is to get the best people able to perform the work to perform the work. Could you drill into that a little bit more and talk about some specific examples about what that really means to owners?
Yeah, so I'll step back for a second on this, and I'll come back to last planner in a minute. But in general terms, so much of our approach in the past to capital project delivery has been try and shift the risk to somebody else, as opposed to who's probably best suited to manage the risk. And in reality, what happens is that risk keeps getting pushed to probably the person or the organization or the firm on the team that probably has the least ability to push back or manage it. And that's a recipe for disaster. And we have to kind of move away from that. And so the context there of having the right people doing the right work, it really comes back to, how do we effectively manage risk as a team? And those that are better suited for risk managing a particular type of risk should be those that are part of the discussion on how to manage that, as opposed to just being pushed onto them. The other element of that from an owner's perspective is whenever risk is being pushed anywhere on the project, it comes with a cost of consideration. Okay. When I was a public owner, I made certain that I didn't set the cost or the actual cost of the project or the contract amount until we actually had a design that had been essentially permitted. And the reason is that if the earlier you set the price, the more risk that is involved, and people will basically price that into their proposals, as opposed to us holding the risk, participating in the decision making, and using that risk money to enhance the value proposition. We felt was a much stronger approach to that. So that's kind of tied to whoever is best suited to manage the risk should do that. Now, coming to whoever should be performing the work, the beauty about the last planner system is if you have the right people in the room, and if you're unfamiliar with the last planners are those that are actually the last people planning the work. And in a design context, that could be the job captains or design discipline leads. In the construction world, that's typically your foremen and superintendents, and that they're deciding where they're going to send their crews, how they're going to work. They have some idea what their expected production rates are, and they know what's necessary in order to release their work and allow their work to flow. And so those conversations that happen through the last planner process are really key to the success of the system. We have people that try and say, well, here's the plan, and we'll just put it up on the wall. That misses the point. The power of this is the conversations that happen with the trades among themselves and having a common plan to move forward so that they can get better flow on the project. And so kind of coming back to who's the right person to do the work. If you're doing last planner right, you will find any scope gaps and potential missed handoffs as part of that process is part of the planning. And if you do it during planning as opposed to during actual implementation of the work, good things happen. You have an opportunity to develop mitigation measures so that you don't create problems on the production and on the project. Long-winded answer, but
well, that's very good. Mike, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to comment. It was a fantastic answer, and we're running out of time. But you might comment on my comment. I guess is that as this is just a fabulously well put together presentation, and what strikes me as an owner is I have to figure out ways to start the projects, critical success factors, and the key components of the project's needs and wants with risk, because it's all going to flow to the implementation of you know, the modern day project, I'll say, with these lean techniques interwoven, right? And you know, this pretty dynamic shift from, you know, just shoving the risk to wherever like the weak link is, versus, you know, embracing the risk and trying to figure out where it best is best dealt with, Dave, is just a, you know, really fundamental change to the industry. And it's vital in my mind that owners kind of understand that and appreciate it so that they can align their consultants and their own people with how to go about doing that. So, I mean, I'm hoping that you concur with that, and I was just sort of curious if you had anything to add to that.
No, I think you're spot on there, Mike. So,
well, it's 1 o'clock, and we are pretty punctual around here in the DBIA Owners Council. And Dave, it was really good. I mean, I could kind of listen to that every month, to be honest with you, because I think that's really where the success of the projects, you know, really kind of take root. So, you know, I wanted to thank you and thank you for doing this. And if there are any follow-up questions that you'd like to get to Dave, for those listening in, please feel free to let Eric or myself know, and we can circulate those back. But Dave, thanks again so much for doing this. Much appreciated.
yeah, you're welcome, Mike, and thank everybody for making the time to join us.
You bet. Okay.
Great.
Bye.